All right, our next presenter is Dr. Ted Peters. The title of his presentation is called, Will Astrobiologists and Ufologists Attend the Same BBQs? A very good question. Dr. Ted Peters got his PhD from University of Chicago, directs traffic at the intersection of science, religion, and ethics. That's an interesting combination, isn't it? Peters is an emeritus professor at the Graduate Theological Union, where he co-edits the journal, Theology and Science, on behalf of the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences in Berkeley, California. Along with Martinez Hewlett, Joshua Moritz, and Robert John Russell, he co-edited Astrotheology, Science, and Theology Meet Extraterrestrial Intelligence in 2018. Along with Octavio Chon Torres, Joseph Seckbach, and Russell Gordon, he co-edited Astrobiology, Science, and Ethics in Public Policy. He is also co-author of UFOs, God's Chariots, Spirituality, Ancient Aliens, and Religious Yearnings in the Age of Extraterrestrials. He has a website. You have that in your information. I just wanted to take and welcome one of our SCU contributing members, Dr. Ted Peters. And let's learn about whether or not they're going to be able to get together with ufologists and astrobiologists for a barbecue. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, so Dr. Peters, are you by any chance out there?
Well, Rich, I can see that bow tie of yours, and I'm really quite jealous. Let me ask whether or not my face has appeared on screen and my voice in your ears.
Yes, it is, and you look absolutely fantastic. And we hear you very well, and I'm glad you like that bow tie of mine. I had that handmade in UK.
Oh, you did? Okay, good. At any rate, you're looking spiffy.
Well, so are you, my friend.
All right. Well, should I start up then? And over my left shoulder, you can see a model of a UFO that I made in the 7th grade on my father's lathe in the basement, and it kind of looks like George Adamski's Venusian scout ship. So this has been a topic that I've been interested in since I was the 7th grade expert in my neighborhood. So I'm Ted Peters, and very interested in the interaction between science and culture, and religion and culture, and how all of those things piece together. I really learned a lot from Alexander Wendt this morning when he introduced the notion of the ontological threat. I had put culture where he put the word ontology, but I think it's worth speculating about how the borders of nation states, which separate us currently, might dissolve in the event that Earth is seen to be a single planetary society in the face of what could be extraterrestrial societies. I think that's an important item to speculate on. My topic here is going to be whether or not and when astrobiologists and ufologists are going to attend the same barbecues. And by astrobiology now, I mean science in general, of course, quite specifically. Astrobiology as we know it today is about 30 years old. Its predecessor was exobiology, but it is a field encompassing field in the sense that it needs a variety of sciences to contribute to what it is. If I could have the next slide, I'd appreciate it. And so the question is, why do astrobiologists and ufologists not come to the same barbecues? For a number of years before COVID, my friend Doug Vakoch, who had been a researcher at SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, and later then he left in order to start METI, that's the messaging arm or active SETI. Each summer, he would have in his backyard, he had a good sized backyard, a barbecue. And a lot of the scientists from SETI would come, and interns, and NASA Ames astrobiologists, and we would talk about the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland A's, and kids would be running between our legs while we sipped our beer and ate our burgers. No ufologists came. In fact, nobody even talked about flying saucers at Doug's barbecues. I also belong to the local unit of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, Sonoma and Marin counties in California. And we don't have barbecues, but we have potlucks. There are no astrobiologists show up for them. Well, if you ask an astrobiologist, and I'll try to document this in the next few minutes, well, why don't you hang around with people who study UFOs? Well, because that's pseudoscience. Really? Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. How about the next slide? Okay, here's Jill Tarter, longtime director of SETI, a kind of heir to Frank Drake and um, Carl Sagan. She'll give us a definition. Astrobiology is the science that deals with the origin, evolution, distribution, and future of life in the universe. Origin and evolution of life, well, you can study that right here on Earth. And actually, that's an important topic, right? Because if we were to understand how life originates, and we already have pretty good knowledge about how it has evolved in the case of Earth, maybe we could map that on uh, biotic chemistries that we discover on off-Earth sites. But then we want to know, do we share this universe with other living things? Well, in the solar systems, SETI scientists and NASA scientists are pretty well convinced that if we're going to have life in the solar system, it's going to be microbial in nature. But if we're going to have intelligent civilizations, more than likely, they will be on exoplanets orbiting other stars in the Milky Way. And since mid 1990s, we've identified maybe 5,000 such stars, some of which are in the habitable zone. And so they're being investigated. There's no question that there's a lot of excitement right now in the field of astrobiology. Next slide, please. So Jill was with SETI. Here's a NASA version, the astrobiology roadmap, which I think in its original formulation might have been around the year 2000 or maybe even earlier. Three main directions. How does life begin and evolve? We saw that with Jill Tarter. We can study that both on Earth and off Earth. Does life exist elsewhere in the universe? And how do we search for life in the universe? So we're going to use telescopes, microscopes, radio astronomy, what are the methods, etc. And so at any rate, let's just work with those understandings of astrobiology as what the scientists do. And you and I probably know lots of astrobiologists. They're competent people, fine people, and the kind of things they study are exciting. Next slide, please. Okay, the Mutual UFO Network. I was gratified to hear Rich Hoffman talk about his years with MUFON. Of course, there have been over the decades many different UFO research organizations. This is the one I happen to like the best, and it has been sustained for about 50 years now. Take a look at MUFON, Self-Understanding. I got to put my glasses on to read it. The scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. Walter Andrus, a leader in many of the earlier years, was a devout Presbyterian, and he thought science in general would improve society, make society better. And so, if we're going to study UFOs, let's study them scientifically because maybe all of society can benefit. But what the point I want to make here is UFO researchers have and continue to think of themselves as being scientific. Oh, yes, if you go to a MUFON annual meeting, you're going to run into New Age crystals and hypnotic regression and walk ins. And all the woo woo is going to be there, to be sure. But the core, and certainly many of the individuals there, have a self understanding that they're scientifically oriented. So I think we need to recognize that. Now, if you could put that same slide up again, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, MUFON develops this a little bit. Investigate UFO sightings. And now I was a UFO investigator. I was the state director for Louisiana for a period. This is the kind of thing which Hoffman also did. And is there a scientific mindset? Yes, there is. Of course, when you're investigating UFOs, you can't do experiments that you can repeat, right? It is data collection, but it's not experimental. And we would send our reports to Walter in Seguin, Texas. He'd put them in a file. And once in a while, if I was doing research, I'd drive to Seguin and visit Walter, and he had everything in his garage. And I'd look around his garage and see if he had a book I hadn't read, I'd borrow that. Or if I was doing research on Applewhite nettles, the two, say, Walter, you got a file on them? Yeah, he'd open up the file. Yeah, here it is. And I'd take a pile of files home with me and get the data. And then I put the files back in the mail and send them back. So MUFON was a data center. Now, today, MUFON is much more sophisticated. And over the years, the amateurs have been gradually replaced by PhDs and professionals. So this data collection on the part of MUFON is a pretty sophisticated operation. And do these people think of themselves as doing scientific work? Yes, they do. So, secondly, promote research on UFOs to discover the true nature of the phenomenon. Well, any curious researcher wants to get the true nature of whatever they're studying. But note here, with an eye towards scientific breakthroughs. What does that mean? That we come up with a new detector? No, it means that we might discover that who's ever piloting the UFOs, they might have a scientific breakthrough that we would want to know about. For what purpose? Improving life on our planet. Again, science for the benefit of life here on Earth. Okay, then finally, maybe if I can look at the slide one more time, then educate. MUFON is going to be in the job of educating the public about flying saucers, UFOs, UAP, etc. Next slide, please. Well, let's look at Robert Powell and Sarah Little and Rich Hoffman and many of those here today with SCU. It's the scientific coalition here. We conduct, promote, and encourage rigorous, note the word rigorous in there has been added, rigorous scientific examination of unidentified aerospace phenomena, or UAP, commonly known as UFOs. Does SCU understand itself to be scientific? The answer is clearly, forcefully, yes. So if an astrobiologist will not invite an SCU scientist to their barbecue, What's their excuse? Next slide. Galileo project just appeared, a year or so ago under the leadership of Avi Loeb at Harvard. Some SCU people are either researchers or on his advisory board. And I'm going to make a point of this later. Seth Shostak from SETI is also joined that advisory board, and Avi Loeb wants everyone who has a scientific mindset to be prejudice-free, to pursue science as well as investigate UAP. Can you be an affirmer of the extraterrestrial hypothesis and be part of the Galileo project? The answer is yes. Avi Loeb himself believes in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So what I want to say to the astrobiologists, look, if you don't invite ufologists to your barbecues, don't claim that they're pseudoscientists, because that's certainly not the self-understanding of the ufologist. And you've got qualified researchers who are taking UAP very seriously. Next slide. As Rich mentioned on the front end, I have one foot in both astrobiology on the one hand and ufology on the other. A year ago, with my colleague Octavio John Torres, never actually met him in person, only via email. And Octavio is in Peru, and we, along with two other scientists, put together this book on astrobiology, science, ethics, and public policy. And of course, our scientists were those that you're going to find established and working in, shall we say, legitimate institutions of space research. Then a few months ago, Octavio teamed up with Jensine Andreessen, and Jensine is one of the researchers on Avi Loeb's Galileo project, and put together Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that book just out, which mixes astrobiology and ufology together in conversation. And so Octavio is got one foot in each. And look at his kind of programmatic statement. The scientist who engages with UAP does not automatically become a pseudoscientist, since he or she would not be asserting anything in particular in an a priori manner. So he's addressing here a kind of mythology or a trope that winds its way through our culture, that anybody interested in flying saucers believes that we've got little green men who are landing here. No, it is very possible that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is just one hypothesis among many. And you don't, if you're a scientist, you don't have to hold the extraterrestrial hypothesis. If you're studying the phenomenon, you can have an open mind on the front end, regarding whatever explanation you're going to come up with. And that seems to be an important one. Where is the bias on the front end? Where is the bias on the front end? And most people are going to evaluate whether you're genuinely scientific or not, on the question, where's your bias on the front end? You don't have to have an ETH bias on the front end to be a ufologist. And frankly, you don't have to have a bias that says everyone in ufology is a nutcase if you're an astrobiologist. Oh, I pushed my button. Please give me the next slide. So I want to look a little bit now at our astrobiologist friends. Why will they not go to a barbecue with a ufologist? So here's Chris Impey. and I admire Chris a lot. He had been chair of the astrobiology department at the University of Arizona for a number of years. Maybe he still is. He's a prolific writer and communicator, and what he does that I think is especially noteworthy is theology and, or I'm sorry, astrobiology and culture. And on one occasion, he went to northern India to a Buddhist monastery there because they wanted to learn about astrobiology, and he kind of did a dialogue with them. So he's not an ivory tower or an observatory troglodyte. He really does get out. But even so, if you say, Chris, why won't you go to a ufologist barbecue? Here's his answer. Why am I a UFO agnostic? I think it likely that there is advanced life with technological capabilities somewhere in the universe and maybe in our galaxy. But the way UFOs present themselves doesn't pass the smell test. Well, how many of you who write scientific papers about your research have the phrase smell test in them? I don't know. Chris, as open-minded a scientist as he can be, says there's something not right about ufology. Now, what Chris Impey enunciates is almost a mantra in the astrobiological community. It goes something like this. Oh, yes, the Milky Way galaxy is teeming with intelligent life, but they're not coming here. Well, if you want to give a bad day to a ufologist, that's the one thing you say, but they're not coming here. Okay, let's try the next slide. Well, here's Carl Peterson, also had a chapter in our book on extraterrestrial intelligence. Carl is a subatomic physicist. He doesn't specialize in astronomy or astrophysics, but he was asked to write because we wanted testimony from Bohmian subatomic physics on the question of determinism or indeterminism at the quantum level, and he's very much a disciple of David Bohm, and so that was his contribution there to that book. But okay, Mr. Scientist, Dr. Peterson, what do you think about ufology? Much of the UAP data that has been gathered, sightings, videos, and witness accounts, are not high quality physics data and lack sufficient credibility in supporting evidence. Well, I wonder if there are any of our SCU colleagues that might want to prove Dr. Peterson wrong on that, but note what's at stake. Chris Impey and Carl Peterson, they're gathering data, and they want the data to pass the smell test. They want it to be subject to the analysis of a physicist. Can the ufologist deliver on those things? Next slide, please. Here's Guy Consolmagno. I believe he's an astrophysicist, current director of the Vatican Observatory. And yes, the Vatican has been studying the stars since Galileo, or at least a few decades after Galileo. And they continue to do their research and publish their papers. And even though the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is not the first priority on their list, it is, of course, included in their portfolio. So Guy, who is a Jesuit brother, is asked here, come on, Mr. Astrobiologist, why not include research into UFOs? Well, here's what Brother Guy has to say. But we have no artifacts from UFOs in our labs, none, zilch. We have nothing to nothing to test. Thus, my skepticism remains. So if you're a ufologist, don't expect to go to Guy's house for a summer barbecue. So that seems to be what's going on. If you may, those of you who've been in ufology for a long time, you'll remember Stan Friedman passed away recently. And Stan, ever since I was a kid, would have an address called Are UFOs Real? Or UFOs Are Real. And he would start by telling us about his scientific credentials as physicist. And then he would go on to make a scientific case, not just that UAP are real, but they come from an intelligent civilization, one or more intelligent civilizations off Earth. And he would say the case for the reality that we're being visited by ETI is stronger than it takes to convict somebody in a courtroom. So, what is Stan Friedman's self-understanding? It is he's a scientist and he's proffering scientific hypotheses. Well, what does Stan think about the belittlement on the part of the astrobiologists against the ufologists? Well, he wants to say, you guys, you astrobiologists, you have assumed from the beginning that UAP do not come here courtesy of extraterrestrial intelligence. You are prejudiced. You're biased on the front end. And so the argument went back and forth, and he would attack, especially Seth Shostak, whom I mentioned earlier. And Seth is now on the advisory panel for Avi Loeb's Galileo project. Let's try the next slide. All right, I want to leave the discussion we've just had on the question of the self-understanding of the astrobiologist and the ufologist. Both understand themselves to be scientists. The reason they don't go to the same barbecue is that the astrobiologist thinks that he or she is doing good science and thinks that the ufologist is doing pseudoscience. We'll ask all the ufologists that are here in this conference, do you think you're doing pseudoscience? Do you think your science is equal to that of Seth Shostak or what have you? Now I want to change to a different topic. You don't have to believe in the ETI myth if you want to study UAP. You don't have to. But there's no question that the idea that we're being visited by an intelligent civilization off Earth has been here since the late 1940s. And so it is probably one of the most important things that make ufology fascinating and dramatically important. Now, what I'm about to say is the following, and this it might be a variant on Alexander Wentz's ontology, but I'm going to call it culture, science and culture, religion and culture, and that is that the worldview that astrobiologists have and that ufologists have overlap in very subtle and important ways. So now I'm going to put on my theological hat and take a look at what I call the ETI myth. Let's go to the next slide. Back it up one, please, if you would. There should be, yeah, here we are. Okay, this is a t-shirt I bought at the 50th anniversary of Roswell. And this is the ETI myth in a nutshell. It's the assumption that there is progress and evolution, that the human race represents one particular stage. I need to make a quick trip to the door. Just a second. I'm actually at another conference in a hotel room, and my wife just had to get in here. That allegedly there is a progression over a period of time from the simple to the complex, from the stupid to the intelligent, that the human race is at one particular stage, and that if we continue to evolve longer into the future, we're going to get more intelligent. Okay. Is that a good scientific theory? Well, no, it's not. If you believe it, and then you surmise, what about those extraterrestrial civilizations? What if they've evolved longer than we have? They'll be more intelligent than we have, and we could benefit. All right, the myth is beginning to take shape. Now, let me pause here and say something about myth. Classic or ancient myths were stories, and they were usually stories of origin that would tell us why the king on the throne deserves our respect, because the gods have created the universe and put the king on the throne. A myth today is a little bit more subtle. It sometimes takes the form of a story, but usually it's a conceptual set. It's a set of assumptions that we make without proving, that provide a framework then within which we do our study. And sometimes that framework even sets research goals and agendas. So next slide. So let me give you an example, two examples here to show how the same myth, the same conceptual set of unquestioned and in some cases unscientific assumptions works in both astrobiology and ufology. Here's the handbook of astrobiology, only a couple years old. Any ETI we do encounter is likely to be what? Far more technologically advanced than our own. Where you say, well, the logic is, of course, if they're not more technologically advanced, we'll never meet them. Well, okay, all right. But if you start seeing technologically advanced or scientifically advanced, a little flag ought to go up. Hey, I think maybe we got a myth going here. MUFON UFO Journal. We must assume that ETs arriving at Earth have superior technology, as they possess travel capabilities far beyond those presently available to Earth's people. Now, all by itself is kind of reasonable, but what if it fits into a kind of larger worldview, metaphysics or ontology? Next slide. Now, the myth takes story form. And usually you only get fragments of it, but once in a while the story gets told. So life originates on Earth. We still are not sure how it's done. Miller Urey, of course, come very close with Darwin's pond, etc. But somehow or other, life gets going. Then it evolves, and now we slip in an extra scientific element, the advance in complexity. Did life get more complex on Earth? Well, yeah, that, of course, that's a fact. But was there a purpose built in that would drive it? Well, the evolutionary biologists that I know would say, no, of course not. It was random. That's why life sat around for 2 billion years, not doing much until finally something got going. So what we get here is the impartation of the doctrine of progress. We know what progress is. We've observed it over the last 400 or 500 years, right? Human race might have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, but technological progress we can see is about 300 or 400 years old. Now we insert it into evolution so that now we think nature is progressive. And how is it progressive? Well, Simple things get complex, stupid things get intelligent. And your and my ancestors were more stupid than we are. You remember in the 19th century, all that stuff about how big the head is that can hold the brain and all that stuff. And here, the human race now is much more intelligent than our ancestors were. And how do we know? The key is the development of science and technology. The development of poetry and art does not count, but science and technology counts as a sign of superior intelligence. So if we can just extrapolate science and technology into the future, we're going to get greater science, greater technology, and you might as well throw in world peace, right? Feeding all of the hungry, having medical advances that will allow us to live to be 1,000 years old. Isn't it wonderful that science is going to save the human race from all of the difficulties? I call that a myth. It's got a mixture of science and non-science in there, and it's a really great story. Now, wait, remember, I said that those ancient myths, such as the creation of the world by Osiris in Egypt, would justify why the pharaoh sits on the throne, right? Or the Babylonian creation myth tells us when Marduk defeats Tiamat the dragon, why the king should sit on the throne. Are there any versions of that in contemporary science? Huh. How about the next slide? One of my, oh no, you don't have, oh, this is an old set of slides, nuts. All right, take the slide off and let me just tell you, oh, I'm sorry I don't have it to show you, but I have a friend named Chris McKay who's a Mars expert at NASA. And if you just walk out of his office into an atrium, there's a giant wall painting there. And the wall painting is, you know what? Put the slide back that you had before with the arrow going up on yeah. All right, now imagine that this is an artistic form sitting in NASA. And on the far left side, you have the early planet Earth with rich elements coming from space. And you have the volcanic Earth finally making room for the seas, and then the origin of life. The ocean becomes Darwin's pond, and you have lightning strike. Remember lightning and electricity from Darwin through, actually it began with Galvin and Erasmus Darwin, Darwin's grandfather, the idea that lightning starts life off, and Mary Shelley and Frankenstein puts that in there, and you get it again with Miller Urey in 1952. So this belief that somehow or other prebiotic material is struck with electricity and starts life, that's been around for a couple hundred years, and it hasn't gone away, even though it's not been proven. Be that as it may, that's what you get in this painting that I'm so sorry I can't show you. And then DNA forms, and it winds its way through the ocean, and then finally it makes sea animals, and then the animals with legs get on land, and you get the dinosaurs, and then you get primitive human beings, and then you climb up to the top of the mountain, and what do you get? The scientists. You get an observatory that's connecting with extraterrestrial life. And basically, it's just like the myth of Marduk or the myth of the Osiris in Egypt. The king in this place is not the pharaoh, it's the astrobiologist, because the astrobiologist connects us with our own future, a more highly advanced technological and scientific communication. You're going to find this in both the UFO community and the astrobiology community. It's again a mixture of good science and non-science, and you can't say, well, it's only the UFO nuts and kooks and their religious cults that believe this. No, it's right in the heart of astrobiology. Next slide. Okay, let me just use Jill Tarter as an example here. Here are some of the things she says, which ETI or their robotic emissaries, that picks up this whole notion of post-biological existence in artificial intelligence, will be far older than we are, okay? So if you assume that evolution is progressive, if you add a few million years, then you get what? Increased intelligence, increased science, increased technology. Okay, just tap the next one, please, for me. Now you got to fall. I mean, this is a whole theology of redemption at work here. Their longevity. Now, remember, if you have advanced science and technology, you increase the human lifespan. Their longevity is inconsistent with organized monotheistic religions. Oh, okay. So Jill has an opinion about religion. Religion is less evolutionarily advanced than science and technology is. And it is religion that leads to what? Violence on Earth. So I wonder if we could evolve ourselves beyond violence and beyond religion. And the more highly evolved we are, we become more scientific and technological, right? Such religions are responsible for the longest lasting warfare and destruction. This is an empirically verifiable scientific principle that must have derived from some laboratory or another. It certainly couldn't be ideology slipping into it, science, could it? Next, just tap it one more time, please. Now we get the future millennium, the kind of eschatology, the doctrine of salvation where science saves us. There will be no sex when science and technology take over. There will be no sex. There will be a highly established code of ethics. So advanced science and technology bring us a highly advanced code of ethics. And if the scientists on Earth have not been able to achieve a highly advanced code of ethics, then maybe those extraterrestrials coming from heaven to Earth will bring us a post-violent code of ethics. Just one more tap. For those of you who know your history, this is called Gnosticism. It's the belief that the human predicament is determined by ignorance, and therefore redemption is found in knowledge. In the ancient Roman mystery cults, it was esoteric knowledge. In the modern world, it's intellectual knowledge. The aliens, may lead us this is now the Carl Sagan vision of through electronic communication at SETI, they may give us information-rich material. The aliens may tell us how it is possible to transition from the my God versus your God conflicts of the traditional religions that Jill doesn't like to a more stable universal religious understanding. So here the ETI myth leads us through science and technology beyond religion to a universal understanding in which we'll have a code of ethics that our ancestors were unable to achieve. So I want to say this is myth right in the heart of science. And not that there's anything wrong with it. I would just say, don't confuse the myth with the empirical data or the hypotheses that derive from the data. Don't try to practice theology without a license. Don't try to pretend that your science is somehow doing theological work. Next slide. Here's Frank Drake. Now, Frank Drake is imagining the eschaton here, or the arrival of the millennium. And let me see, I'm putting my glasses on to see if I can read my slide. So Frank is saying about the future now, contact with, and if you don't know, he was one of the founders and directors of the SETI project. Everything we know, knowledge. Almost everyone says we don't know yet whether ET is there. But Frank says, by the way, I love Frank. So this is not in any way a personal thing. It's just trying to look at the structure of thinking in the scientific mindset. Everything we know says there are other civilizations out there to be found. The discovery of all such civilizations would enrich our civilization with valuable information about, look what comes on the list: science, technology. No, there's no art or music here. Science, technology, and sociology. Sociology, really? This information could directly improve our abilities to conserve and to deal with sociological problems. Poverty. Poverty. Oh my goodness. We're going to conquer poverty on Earth once we meet the aliens. Cheap energy. We're going to solve the petroleum problem, global warming problem. Cheap energy is another potential benefit of discovery as our advances in medicine. Yes. How to be healthier and live longer. So science saves. And if terrestrial science has not yet saved the human race, then extraterrestrial science can do the job. I just want to call this a myth. It may turn out to be true. Next slide, please. Just another tap. I want to say, I hope Frank Drake is absolutely right. I really do. But he's practicing theology without a license. This is not science. This is not empirical. It doesn't even square with what evolutionary biologists would say we can expect from evolution. It doesn't square with human history. Science up until this point has perpetrated as much evil and destruction as it has benefits for human health. Why would extraterrestrial science be sin-free or evil-free if terrestrial science is not? So it's a beautiful myth. We find it in astrobiology. We find it in the cults of the 1950, the ufology cults as well. So I would say that if you're going to have a religious revival, you could invite both your astrobiologists and your ufologists to that if they believe the same myth. Not everyone does, of course. Next slide, please. Actually, Rich had mentioned that at our Center for Theology and Natural Sciences, I've worked both with the astrobiologists on scientific issues. This book on the left here called Astrotheology. We include some NASA, SETI, AAAS researchers in there. We have Muslim and Jewish theologians also dealing with the implications of extraterrestrial life. And in the UFO book, there I lay out this problem of the ETI myth, actually sometimes skewing both the science and the belief system. And in some cases, the UFO myth gets in the way, I think, of doing really good scientific research. Next slide. Okay, finally, Seth Shostak at SETI. And even though he was vilified by Stan Friedman, I think he's one of the most delightful interpreters of astrobiology to engage in conversation. But even Seth is going to say, and I think all the ufologists should be happy about this, the question of whether UFOs are truly interstellar spacecraft needs to be addressed by careful examination of the claims. Next slide. Bye-bye, and thank you for your attention.
Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you, Ted. That was very interesting and very enlightening. I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. We all appreciate your work and your studies, and continue to do that. And by the way, I have some questions. Are there any questions up in the audience? I've got some on Huva that I'm going to ask you. Does the woo-woo have an irreversible impact on credibility in the UAP field? And private organizations involved in UAP studies distance themselves from the woo-woo as a principle. Is popularity or any publicly necessary, or any publicity necessary to conduct non-bias center research in this field? And I can restate that again, but let's take them. There's three questions there. Does woo-woo have an irreversible impact on credibility in the UAP field?
Well, I think the answer is clearly yes. Why do the astrobiologists look down their noses at ufologists? And they're probably lumping together that sort of core, as I mentioned, in MUFON, who really wants to be rigorous and scientific, but you can't really separate them from those who are looking for Bigfoot or doing Bigfoot and reincarnation therapy. You can't do that. And there are good reasons why establishment scientists want to stay away from certain topics. But in this case, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. It's also the case that if you take a guy like Avi Loeb, for example, whom I don't know personally, but I'm just relying on his public statements. On the one hand, he's a rigorous scientist. On the other hand, he believes in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But can you take advantage of the good science without necessarily taking advantage of other theories, such as the artifact theory of extraterrestrial civilizations, which might not pass the smell test? And I think that's a challenge ufologists face that astrobiologists don't. So I think the question's right on the money. And over the next 10 years, will this situation improve? You know what I would hate to see? Well, this is my personal opinion now. I like the woo-woo people. I like reincarnation therapists. I don't believe that stuff, but I like them, for other reasons. But I do think it is possible for a ufologist to pass the smell test and not kind of pump in woo-woo necessarily, and do good science. But how are you going to persuade an astrobiologist to take a ufologist seriously? That's the kind of the crux of the difficulty I'm dealing with. And it's a sociological problem. I don't think it's a problem in understanding what science is.
So the second part of the question there was, should institutions and private organizations involved in UAP studies distance themselves from the woo-woo as a principle?
I personally would say no, but I think most scientists are going to have to say yes on that. There's a magazine called The Skeptical Inquirer. Some of you might be familiar with it. I love it. It's kind of like your really rigorous skepticism. And they constantly, deliberately merge the serious ufology with the woo-woo. And so even if you did try to keep your distance, there are others out there who wouldn't permit it. So I wonder, now we had a discussion earlier today about academia. Oh, we're going to have one tomorrow on academia. Suppose ufologists publish some really good scientific papers in respected journals that astrobiologists read. I wonder if that might be a better route than trying to say, I'm keeping my distance from all the New Agers. New Agers are a lot of fun. I don't want to keep my distance from them.
The next part of that question was also, there's another one, is popularity or any publicity necessary to conduct unbiased scientific research in the field?
I'm not understanding that question. Can a popular person conduct unbiased science? Well, I would think so. It's in the method where you eliminate the bias on the front end.
There you go. Will computer scientists and experts in AI be invited to the barbecue? If and super intelligence AI exists, then perhaps the answer is yes.
Well, I want to say yes on that, and credit Paul Davies and some of the other far-sighted thinkers about this. As long as we have the prospect right now of superintelligence, of the possibility of uploading the human mind into the computer cloud, or what I think Paul calls post-biological existence, as long as that's a theoretic possibility on Earth, yes, that they should be part of the discussion because we might meet post-biological ETI. And if you think about the light year problem, how are they going to get here if UFO are actually craft? Well, the idea that somehow or other they are a post-biological electronic consciousness, then they could overcome the travel problem. So I really think, yeah, our AI people who explore this possibility should be part of this discussion. By the way, in my kind of hard-nosed, keep science rigorous posture, I do think that speculation, there's plenty of room for speculation in serious science.
Thank you. Would a von Neumann probe, in other words, one able to self-replicate, repair itself, refuel, and everything else, piloted by an artificial intelligence, be alive?
No. Unfortunately, there's a little ambiguity in there because currently everything that we know is alive is biological in character. And so this particular issue of aliveness, personhood, dignity, and rights is already being raised in a speculative way with regard to disembodied intelligence. It's a big discussion. It's a good discussion. And so I think if we were to discover an ETI version of that, I would still say, no, it's not alive, but somebody on their home planet, they're the ones that are doing the snooping.
The next question that I've got here is, where have astrobiologists been? Welcome to the Data Quest.
If Stan Friedman were here, he would hit you with 10 exclamation points. Yes, the ufologists have been gathering great data, and that not just since the Condon report. Even the Condon report had access to a lot better data than anybody admits. So yeah, we got a lot of data. Time to look at it.
Bill Nelson seems to be responsible for getting astrobiologists and ufologists together. How much further will NASA go to open up the secret files? Are space shuttle UAP videos on the agenda, or is this all down to James Webb finding the smoking gun?
Well, I think the James Webb question is probably irrelevant unless it accidentally picks up a visiting spaceship. I don't know how to what the story is with NASA there. I just can't speak for that. Speak to that.
I have a question here for when will scientists talk to experiencers seriously so scientists can learn more?
I don't think astrobiologists currently have the tools to talk with experiencers. You need a team. Astrobiologists are objectivists and data gatherers, etc. I happen to have had a lot of respect for John Mack, even though I disagreed with him quite a bit, because John Mack was able as a psychiatrist to empathize with experiencers and try to get the pre-articulated dimensions of what they were giving voice to and make that into information. So I think you need a scientific team to talk to an experiencer, somebody who understands neurochemistry and someone who understands psychology, etc. And one of the things that was never resolved with John Mack and some of the others who dealt with abductions were these objective or subjective experiences? And if they were objective, how were they objective? I guess you need to throw in a philosopher as well.
Ted, do you see that we will be able to detect biosignatures from UAP in the future?
Yes. Actually, some astrobiologists use the term biota right now. And what they mean by that is not something that is alive, but that it has the actual chemistry that we would expect if it were alive. So that's already going on. So the biochemistry has already been recognized within our solar system and elsewhere, perhaps. Now we just need to move towards actually shaking hands with whoever has that biochemistry.
One of our key people here in the audience said that my 2018 white paper that challenged SETI's no interstellar travel assumption was presented at a meeting attended by astrobiologists, NASA, and SETI scientists. We did argue, but it wasn't a bad barbecue.
I like it. I did not read that, although I am familiar with the controversy, but thank that person for that contribution.
Current astrobiologists and ufologists are focused on Judeo-Christian religions. Why is there a lack of consideration for other worldviews? Would it not help to set a longer table for more inclusive dialogue?
The answer would be yes. I find astrobiologists welcoming theology and religion. They don't know how to do it, but I think that in the next 5 or 10 years, we'll probably see those longer tables increasingly in these conversations. Yeah.
Okay, well, I believe that is all of the questions that I have received or that I see up on Whova as well. So I just want to say thank you again for that, and I appreciate your time and you joining us, and look forward to also having you on tomorrow in the academic discussion, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on that.
All right, in the meantime, I'll look for a bow tie.
All right, well, I can make some recommendations on where you can find a few. I've got quite a few. My wife will be glad to tell you that there's probably more bow ties than there are ties, but anyway. Anyway, thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ted.